Okay, my name is Kirsten Schaper, and today we're going to talk about a recent study that I just did, and it's titled Examination of Self-Reported Preferences as Reinforcers in Elementary School Children. And so this is really a study looking at progressive ratio schedules and how they can compare self-report preferences in children. These specifically were first graders, but hey, let's look at a little background of progressive ratio schedules. A progressive ratio schedule is just a schedule to determine how reinforcing a certain item is. And the way you set that up is the response cost, or the responses required to get access to the reinforcer that you're working for, actually increase by some kind of predetermined level. So perhaps you get a reinforcer after the first 4 responses, and then it takes 5 responses, and then 6, and so on, to receive your reinforcer. So this overall tests the reinforcing strength of any given stimulus, and then you want to examine the break point for each variable that you're testing. And the break point is when the participant stops responding, so you can determine if a participant responds for 30, gives 30 responses to get access to a tangible, and then won't do any more to get access to it, that the break point for that particular stimulus is 30 responses. There's not a lot of research on progressive ratio schedules, but I'm going to review a few of the published articles. Let's see. All of them actually have only compared responding with developmentally disabled populations, but in a variety of contexts. So let's look at a few of these studies. Call et al. In 2012 looked at paired choice assessments and multiple stimulus without replacement assessments using progressive ratio schedules. And they kind of compared which one would be the most accurate, whether you did a paired choice or multiple stimulus. And they actually did a paired choice just at the beginning of the study, and they did multiple stimulus without replacements periodically through the study. And they found that either one was pretty effective at determining what items would be reinforcing, but the paired choice is a little more accurate than the multiple stimulus one. De Leon in 2011, he assessed a variety of reinforcer types within a varied environmental context, trying to capture motivating operations in this one. Francisco in 2008, they compared low versus highly preferred items as reinforcers, and they actually found that lower preferred items would serve as reinforcers in certain contexts. Rohn, Call, and Falcomata in 2005 looked at access to reinforcers immediately after the progressive ratio schedule trials. So there were different conditions. Some of them where the participants knew they would receive access to the reinforcer when the trials were ended, and they saw quite a decrease in those trials. So let's look at this study. We had 3 participants, and they were all typically developing first graders. And this just took place. The assessments took place at their school after the day had ended, an empty classroom. So it was a familiar environment for them. And prior to the study, or the initial point of the study, the children were asked to name their 10 favorite foods, and then we gave them cards to write them down, or we wrote them down on cards, and they had to rank order them, much like the reinforcer assessment for individuals with severe disabilities, only they were doing it for themselves. And then we took the top 3 choices and looked at this and looked to see which 2 might be the most feasible to deliver during this study. And we were able to get 2 from the top 3 from all participants. And then to have a contrast, I observed students in the lunchroom to determine some commonly consumed snacks, because assuming that they would eat the items at lunch, they must have a little bit more preferred value than if they had not eaten them. Most children had many more items in their lunchbox than they consumed during the lunchtime period. So I was able to select 5 items from these, 2 of which were used for each participant in kind of a random order, but I did confirm with the teacher that all the items that were used were things that the participant would consume. Okay, so for the baseline, we gave the participants each a math worksheet, but no reinforcement, and just said, you can work on these if you'd like. And then we just kind of sat there and saw how many they would work on. Then we had an FR1 condition where we gave them a math worksheet very similar to the one we did in baseline. In fact, they were all very similar, and provided a small piece of the target edible for each problem completed. Then during the progressive ratio schedule condition, reinforcement was increased by 1 step for each trial. So the children did 1 problem, they got a reinforcer, then 2 problems, got a reinforcer, and then 3 problems, got a reinforcer. Okay, so that was basically what we did, and we tested 4 items per participant, so 2 self-reported and 2 researchers selected. So let's look at these results. Here's participant 1. And so you can see chocolate chips and M&Ms were the self-reported reinforcers for this participant. You can see they did wind up being the most highly preferred items. You can see here. Actually, the highest breakpoint was M&Ms, and it was almost a little over 30 responses, but you can see that chocolate chip cookies also were pretty high also. But you can also see that they had a high breakpoint on apples. So although overall participant 1 did pick his self-reported reinforcers, or the self-reported reinforcers did turn out to be the most reinforcing, you did see quite a few responses with apples, not so much with graham crackers though. Okay, here's participant 2. Participant 2 had a lot of responding even in the FR1 schedule. So clearly food must have been a very powerful reinforcer, at least after school, for this participant. But you can see potato chips and Oreos were the self-reported items for participant 2. Oreos, you can see, even in the FR1, is pretty high. But look, these are saltine crackers. These were some items that I had picked, actually. It ended up being more powerful in the FR1 condition than the Oreos. Now here we get to the the progressive ratio condition, and definitely Oreos have taken over. But you're getting a lot of responding also here for potato chips too. So pretty variable, but actually this is demonstrating that participant 2 had a very powerful edible reinforcer response. So participant 3, here we have increased responding in the FR1 schedule, and then as we get to the progressive ratio schedule, you can see chicken nuggets and fries were the most highly preferred, but chicken nuggets didn't pan out so well. Here we've got chicken nuggets down here. Clearly not as reinforcing maybe as a participant had supposed they would be, but we do see that participant 3 does enjoy apples, and apples actually had almost as high a breakpoint as the fries. So let's see. So moving on to our discussion. So you can see that this kind of panned out. Self-reported reinforcers did have more reinforcing effects for at least participant 1 than the other 2. The other 2 participants appeared to respond equally well for almost any type of reinforcer. Definitely had some preferred preferences, but kind of clustering together with participants 2 and 3. But this is the first known study to investigate progressive ratio schedules with typically developing population. And I think there's a huge future in using typically developing populations with PR schedules. I did hypothesize 2 alternative conclusions at the outset. One was that the junk food that the kids picked, it was typically junk food that they listed as their favorites, that maybe that would serve as a more powerful reinforcer, given that the school had a very strict no junk food policy, and so those items were in a state of deprivation across the school day. So that was one hypothesis. My second one was that that the healthier items would pan out because the kids were more familiar with these and maybe had developed more of a taste for these, perhaps. The junk food items were more restricted, didn't have access to them, but that perhaps they would satiate quickly on these, given that they were richer foods and the children not used to eating them very often. So, but we did find the self-report surveys were as accurate, but 2 participants also responded to other items frequently also. So anyway, the future of research using progressive ratio schedules to determine breakpoints for other typically developing populations, other contexts. I mean, this could be used in a variety of settings, occupational settings in the workplace, perhaps even municipal and criminal law, determining the breakpoint for reinforcement or perhaps negative reinforcement in those cases. And of course, educational settings when students are making some goals for themselves. So thank you for your time.